Yo, listen. One of the biggest problems legendary television shows face is this. Once audiences decide which era was the classic, period, everything afterward gets judged unfairly forever. Nah, for real. People stop watching carefully. They compare every episode to the peak years emotionally instead of appreciating what the later seasons are actually trying to do. And honestly, I think that is exactly what happened to the later years of All in the Family. Because, were the early seasons revolutionary? Absolutely. Did seasons 1 through 5 change television forever? Without question. But nah, for real. The later seasons were way better, richer, smarter, and more emotionally fascinating than people usually remember. And honestly, I think modern audiences might appreciate them more now than viewers originally did. Welcome back, everybody. And today we are diving deep into why the later years of All in the Family deserve far more respect historically. Because trust me, once the explosive Archie versus Meathead years started fatting, many viewers assumed the show simply declined. But that interpretation misses something really important. The series did not stop evolving. It transformed. And that transformation became surprisingly mature emotionally. Now check this out, because when most people think about All in the Family, they immediately picture the classic early setup. Archie screaming at Michael, Gloria caught in the middle, trying to keep peace inside the household. That dynamic became iconic for good reason, obviously. And Rob created maybe the greatest ideological rivalry in sitcom history. Every dinner table argument felt like America screaming at itself emotionally. That energy powered the revolution. But nah, for real, one of my biggest hot takes is this. Once the Michael and Gloria dynamic started fatting, the show did not become worse. It became different, and honestly much more psychologically introspective. That distinction matters enormously. Now let us talk about why audiences originally struggled with the later years because, the early seasons trained viewers to expect constant, explosive ideological warfare every episode. Archie versus Meathead became the emotional engine of the series. Once that structure weakened naturally, the rhythm changed completely. The house grew quieter. The arguments became less central. The atmosphere turned more reflective, and sometimes even melancholy. Many viewers interpreted that tonal shift as decline automatically. But looking back now, I think the show was actually doing something incredibly brave. It allowed time to affect the characters realistically. And nah, for real, television almost never did that honestly before. Another huge reason the later seasons deserve more respect is Archie himself. Earlier years focused heavily on Archie as cultural symbol and political battlefield. Later seasons reveal something deeper underneath. Loneliness, fear of aging, emotional dependency, confusion about changing family structures. Without Michael constantly provoking ideological explosions, Archie increasingly turns inward psychologically. And one of my biggest opinions is that later-era Archie may actually become more emotionally complex than early-era Archie. Seriously. Starts playing the character less like pure social satire and more like a vulnerable aging man struggling to understand his place inside a changing world. That evolution gives the later years surprising emotional depth. Another fascinating thing about the later seasons is Yo, Gene becomes absolutely extraordinary during this period. Earlier seasons sometimes allowed audiences to underestimate alongside Archie. Later years fully reveal the truth. Is the emotional center holding everything together? As the household changes and original relationships weaken, warmth, compassion, and quiet wisdom become even more essential. And now, for real, one of the greatest achievements of the later seasons is how deeply they reveal Archie's emotional dependence on. Earlier years buried that truth underneath louder comedy and political conflict. Later seasons expose it directly. That emotional realization becomes heartbreaking eventually. Another huge hot take. I honestly think the later seasons accidentally became one of television's earliest serious explorations of aging masculinity. Seriously, Archie increasingly feels like a man watching the emotional systems organizing his life disappear gradually. Michael fades away. Gloria changes. The house grows quieter. The country changes around him. Underneath the anger, you increasingly sense fear and loneliness. That psychological realism feels remarkably modern. Now check this out, because another reason the later years hold up so well is that the writing remains fearless. People sometimes talk like the show stopped tackling serious issues after the early Revolution years. That is not true at all. Race, religion, economic anxiety, gender expectations, political frustration, all those themes remain central. What changes is emotional tone. The series no longer needs to scream constantly to make its point. That maturity actually strengthens certain episodes enormously. And listen. One reason modern audiences may connect more deeply with the later seasons now is because contemporary television viewers are far more comfortable with slow emotional evolution than many network audiences during the 1970s were originally. Today, people appreciate character studies more openly. Quiet sadness, transitional storytelling, emotional ambiguity. The later seasons contain all of that. Another huge reason these years deserve reevaluation is realism. Most sitcoms freeze characters inside eternal repetition forever because networks fear change. All in the Family did the opposite. People age here. Relationships shift. Energy fades. Families evolve. That realism makes the later years emotionally powerful in ways early audiences maybe did not fully appreciate yet. And now, for real, one of the things Norman Lear ever did was allowing the series itself to grow older naturally alongside America. Another fascinating thing about the later seasons is how much more intimate the storytelling becomes. Earlier years often centered huge ideological clashes representing national conflict directly. Later years focus more heavily on emotional consequences afterward. Routine, exhaustion, dependency, fear of irrelevance, quiet loneliness. That shift gives the show unexpected psychological richness. And one of my biggest opinions is that the later seasons work best when viewed less as political satire and more as emotional family drama disguised inside sitcom structure. That perspective changes everything. Another huge hot take. I honestly think later All in the Family prepared television audiences for future prestige dramedy storytelling decades early. Seriously, the emotional atmosphere becomes more layered, ambiguous, and character-focused than traditional sitcom structure usually allowed. The humor remains, obviously, but underneath it, the series increasingly examines emotional survival and aging. That ambition deserves enormous respect. Now let us talk about the atmosphere because, one of the most fascinating things about the later years is how the bunker house itself changes emotionally. Earlier seasons felt crowded, chaotic, loud, and constantly under pressure. Later seasons feel quieter, older, more intimate, sometimes almost haunted by the absence of previous family energy. That environmental storytelling is incredibly sophisticated. Television rarely handled physical emotional atmosphere this subtly during that era. And now, for real, it gives the later seasons a unique identity completely separate from the Golden Age years. Another huge reason these seasons remain compelling is because Archie and his marriage deepens enormously once the household chaos fades slightly. Earlier years often focused on external conflict. Later seasons reveal long-term emotional dependency more clearly. The relationship becomes less sitcom dynamic and more genuine portrait of aging companionship. That evolution feels deeply human. And listen, Gene especially becomes devastating during quieter moments. Tiny expressions, pauses, and reactions suddenly carry enormous emotional weight. One of my biggest opinions is that her later season work deserves just as much praise as the famous early years. Another fascinating detail is how the later seasons quietly prepare audiences for Archie Bunker's place emotionally. You can already sense the coming loneliness, the growing vulnerability, the emotional fragility underneath Archie's routines. That transition gives the later years additional importance within the larger Norman Lear universe. And now, for real, watching the series evolve naturally into something more reflective actually makes the overall character journey richer. Another huge hot take. I honestly think audiences sometimes punish long-running shows simply for no longer feeling young, explosive, and revolutionary. But aging itself can become artistically meaningful. The later seasons of All in the Family understood that. They captured what happens after revolutions cool down, and ordinary emotional life continues anyway. That is powerful storytelling. So when people say the later seasons were better than people remember, they are talking about much more than nostalgia or revisionism. They are talking about a television series mature enough to evolve beyond its original formula and explore aging, loneliness, emotional transition, and family change with honesty very few sitcoms ever attempted. The energy softens. The conflicts shift. Archie grows more vulnerable, becomes even more essential. And somehow through all those changes, the series remains deeply human until the very end. That is greatness. Tell me in the comments whether you think the later seasons deserve more appreciation, because honestly, I think many people stop watching too early and miss how emotionally rich the show became afterward. And drop a like if you believe later-era Archie Bunker was actually more psychologically fascinating than early-era Archie, because trust me, there is a very strong argument for that. Subscribe for more deep dives into classic television history, Because we still need to explore Archie Bunker's place the Norman Lear universe and the episodes that transformed television forever. And remember this, early All in the Family captured America's loudest arguments. The later seasons captured the emotional aftermath after the shouting finally started fading away.